Great. Well, welcome everybody. So we'll kind of go through the same routine and I'll do some leadership stuff and April will talk about framework and Angie's going to do some project stuff, but I also think some math specific stuff too. So, okay. So today or this evening, we're going to talk a little bit about an entry plan. So thinking about when you're ready to implement your project, thinking about your plan for kind of getting started with that. Sometimes that's called an entry plan. So many of you were able to meet one-on-one and share your ideas for your projects, and there were so many great ideas. And at a certain point, you'll be moving forward, not just making a plan, but taking action if you haven't already. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the leadership side of taking action. So you have an awesome plan, you've decided who are the important people or stakeholders, and you've kind of got that part figured out. So now what? Um, so thank you. Okay. So when you have a wonderful idea and you're just sure everyone's going to love it, it's easy sometimes to confuse enthusiasm with self-righteousness. And usually that's just if you're feeling really passionate about something. It's like, no, I know this. I've studied this. This is the way. And sometimes it can come across as being maybe a little bit in your face or a little bit of know-it-all. But of course, we'd never advocate for a leader to be those things or to be pushy. And you can go to the next slide, April. So ideally, your work will be in collaboration with others. I mean, just look at that picture. Look how happy everyone is. That's all it takes, right? Well, usually there's a little bit more. And realistically, it's probably going to be somewhere in between. So hopefully closer to the collaboration side. And it could be a fine balance of stepping into that leadership role, especially if your role is a teacher right now. So a lot of the people you're leading are also see you as their peers or you see them as your peers. But as you step into that, you want to remember to maintain empathy and understanding for all those you're working with. And this is why it's good to develop a plan or at least to do some reflection before you begin your project implementation. So you don't want to bowl people over with your ideas, no matter how great your project is. Some people just might not be ready for whatever change you're asking for. So it's important to be reflective of how you manage the people you're working with or your important stakeholders. Okay, so why is change so difficult, so hard? I want you to think about that. And does anyone have any ideas? We can just actually, I don't think there's too many of us here. Maybe just unmute yourself if you have any thoughts on why is change so hard for people or organizations?
The unknown.
And I think as teachers, I think teachers are very passionate. And so I think sometimes when people try to tell you that, not necessarily that you're doing something wrong, but they want to change something that you become kind of passionate about, or sometimes it could be set in your ways, you know what I mean? Teaching a certain way, and then they ask you to all of a sudden teach a different way. I think sometimes just change itself is hard.
Mhm.
I feel like you can see it even with kids, even in, I teach third grade, and it's like just the easiest thing to see it is handwriting, you know? It's like, doesn't matter how many times you tell them the correct way to form that letter, it's ingrained, And even if they want to try to get better, it's hard. And I see it even in my own handwriting where the kids are like, that's not an S. And I'm like, I know, I make my S's weird. I have to go really slow if I want to make my S's look right. So some of it is just like, I don't know, our body knows and we have a way of doing things. And it's just, I don't know, I think part of it is just how we're wired.
I like that. I've never thought about that. Is maybe we are biologically wired to not change after a certain point. And then I think it was Charity, you were saying the unknown. I mean, there might be a whole level of anxiety, right? Maybe that's that unknown is it's unknown, but why does that matter? Probably because some anxiety comes along with that. And just set in our ways. There could be so many different barriers that can get in the way of you wanting to implement your change because of its change, and that's hard. And so if you look at this quote, it says the management of people is probably a greater skill mandated than individual brilliance. So even if you have the greatest idea out there, there's going to be some management of people it's going to have to happen. So today we're going to focus on the people you work with so that you can successfully manage your project, your plan, your goal, kind of your big idea and implementing that. Okay, so first of all, we always want to assume positive intentions. I always say at any given day, any given time, everyone's doing the best that they can. And so if you kind of have that mindset that, people aren't out to get you or purposely trying to get in the way of you fulfilling your mission or your goal, it's helpful to get curious about the people and the organizations that you're working with instead of just getting frustrated. So one way to think about this or to better understand the people you're working with and the stakeholders related to your project could be where are they on this continuum we see here in relation to the change that you want to implement. So to better understand this model, you could even think of yourself as a teacher. So when you started teaching, you might have been unaware of the best way to go about teaching math or what best practices were. If you didn't even know there were best practices, this was me when I first began teaching, then you'd be at the unaware stage. You don't even know what you don't know. And so when you're implementing a new change, some people just might be completely in the unaware stage, which means they're probably not they're not probably readily ready to make that change immediately. Going along with that kind of analogy, now if maybe you were unaware in the beginning and then maybe you took TMT or you had an amazing mentor teacher, you might have moved into the conscious stage and at least knew there was a certain way you should be teaching. You knew what you didn't know at this point. And now that you're in math leads, you could be in the action or the refinement stage. You're not just conscious, but you were doing something or making changes based on that understanding. So it's good to understand yourself in that regard, but it's also, I want you to think about those people you're working with, specifically related to your goals and your project and where they are on this continuum. If they're at the unaware stage, a first goal might be about moving them simply from the unaware stage to the conscious stage. So basically giving them the information so they're at least aware. They might know what they don't know, I guess, at that stage. And this is important to know because if someone isn't even at the conscious level or understanding of what changes need to be made, it will make your job much more difficult to implement any change, really. Thank you. All right. So if we assume people you're working with, stakeholders, are not in the unaware stage, but they aren't jumping on board yet, or they're giving you some pushback with your project, you could think of it as there's what's called a knowing and doing gap. And I think we're all guilty of this at times is sometimes we know what should be done and we don't do it. And so there's that gap between what we know and what we're actually doing. So people may know that they should be doing something, they're not doing it. One tool that can help you assess this issue or how to implement your leadership goals is to look at people or an organization. So I'm speaking a lot of people, but this is true for organizations too. You can look at what's called a skill will matrix. And it's a little bit like the awareness continuum, but it's also different. It might be a better reflection tool depending on your preference or maybe your circumstances. And so this matrix can help you determine the readiness of a person or organization to implement change. And it may help you identify what barriers exist. For example, if a person might be a barrier to you reaching your goal or mission as a math leader. Let's say you're trying to get a teacher on board with a new expectation for assessment. And I know some of you, your projects were around assessments. That teacher may be willing, but lack the skills to do it, and thus they're unable. They literally don't have the skills or training needed to do what you're asking. So they would be in the willing quadrant, but in the not unable because of their skills. Or it could be the opposite, that they're able, perfectly capable, but simply not willing. And that could be for any number of reasons. And maybe they think they know a better system, or like we said, they're set in their ways, or maybe they're just anxious about it. So if all your stakeholders are in the willing and able quadrant, I think that's the top right, you are in good shape. However, even one holdout or naysayer can cause a huge disruption or barrier to your success in implementing your project, reaching your goals. And if you don't have all the stakeholders or a whole organization in the able and willing quadrant, that's when you want to get curious and ask yourself, where are they? And what can be done to move them to the able and willing quadrant? Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to put you in breakout rooms and I want you to discuss these things. I think I'm just going to put you in rooms with 2 people, so this will be kind of short. But I want you to think about identify your stakeholders. So a stakeholder, it's any of the important people related to your project. It could be administrators, teachers, students, parents. So identify your stakeholders and where they are on the continuum or the quadrant or both. What barriers or obstacles are preventing them from being both willing and able? And what actions can you take to move them to the able and willing quadrant? So I think I can put everyone in rooms. Okay. Does anyone want to share kind of what they talked about? Maybe some of those barriers, or in relation to the skill will or the awareness continuum? Maybe share some of the challenges you might be facing.
Well, Karen and I, we both work in a very small school, and really didn't have that many challenges, which was kind of refreshing. Yeah, so that was I thought that was kind of nice, where we kind of move right up there and have the support from our colleagues and administration. So that was refreshing.
That's excellent. Anyone else? Is everyone's being fully supported? Is there anyone who is having any challenges or barriers?
My biggest barrier is just my schedule.
Time, right?
That's the understatement of the year.
Mhm.
That's
Never-
what I was gonna say, being able to sit down with my colleague, it just feels like there's stuff always coming up and we almost have to take time out of our work schedule, and neither one of us want to do that.
Mhm. Yes, all those current realities, right? That are also barriers that make things really difficult too. So, well, if you had some challenges, and maybe it's not with this project, but as you move into being math leaders, this might come up. This graphic, the one that I added here, it suggests how to move people who are in a certain quadrant. So if someone is unable and willing, someone is unable and, okay, sorry, let me look at this. So you could see if they're unable, but they're willing, okay, or they're confident, they want to do this, then you would provide more training. Right? But if they're unable and unwilling, they talk about move. And what could that move be, right? You move them out of the building, I don't know, right? But you basically find some way to find some movement. Any movement is good movement. So any little thing you can come to an agreement on, or make the most tiny minuscule goals for them, or agreements where they can move forward just a little bit. And then I love if they're able and willing. That's where you want to empower them. And that's where, I mean, that's a kind of math leads too, is that these are math teachers that they're able and they're willing. And we hope that we're providing a platform where you're feeling empowered to use leadership skills and move forward. So this is just a good thing to look at if you run into any of this. And then it tells you kind of like, okay, this is something that might help. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. And this is something you can do if you find it helpful. Write down the person, where are they, what notes, and then what's your plan? So I'm going to encourage them, or I'm going to train, or of course, these are very broad terms. So you would want to get as specific as you can. Another thing to think about, oh, go ahead.
Courtney, I guess on that, just from my, just interactions, like being, in a math department, from like a strong math department to like a weaker one where everybody was kind of at odds and stuff. I feel like when you go in there as a leader, you kind of have to plan some actions based on what you know from the group. So then like you're not kind of blindsided. And so you already know, hey, I'm going to do this so that there's no tension or whatever. You know what I mean? I think you kind of have to know what buttons you can push or how far you can kind of push different things. So anyway, so I kind of like that you brought up this matrix, because I think the action plan is so important, because if you offend somebody like right away, it's going to be really hard to get them back on track to like even be willing to listen to what you're presenting. So anyways, just a thought out there.
No, I really like that. Thanks, Nicole. And I think you're right. And that's why we kind of talk about that entry plan is going in having already thought about it, right? So you're not, like we said, bowling people over, because you're going to do so much more work if you, like you said, offend someone up front versus getting to know the people. Maybe you do know them. Great. Think of them on this matrix if you need to. And we say a lot of times in teaching, know your content, know your students. But when you're in a leader, it's kind of like know the people that you're leading, right? And adapt as necessary. So that's such a good point. Thank you. Okay, another thing that you can think about, and so this might be those people that are able and unwilling. That what's going on there? And so you can look at this theory. This is the theory, it's a theory of motivation, which is like a whole I guess category of psychology. And this one is Ryan and Dici. I'm sorry, I forgot to put the date. I want to say it's 2008, but I'm not sure. But this theory it posits that people are motivated to do work or make change if they feel competent in what they're doing, they feel connected to others in the organization where the work is to be done, and that they have autonomy or some control over what they do. I've thought a lot about this as myself as a teacher, and you can think about how this relates to you. When autonomy was always a big one for me. So if someone was always telling me what to do, how to do it, I wasn't as motivated. And that's partly just my personality too. But think of times when we haven't felt competent. That's usually when you have the kids who don't want to do this stuff. Well, as adults, it's not that different either. And so if you're not feeling competent, you're not going to be motivated. So it makes sense that if people feel like they're having to do something they don't want to do and that they don't think they're good at for an organization that they don't care about, they're not going to be motivated. So this is another lens that you can look through if you're finding that motivation is lacking, especially if they're able but not willing, when you're trying to implement change within mathematical practices or your work as a math leader. So the competence piece goes back to that will and skill matrix. and how able or competent does a person feel. And being connected is something that you may you may not have control over this, but it might also be the best starting place, is getting someone connected to your goal or your cause or to math, or even as being part of the community. Anything that can get them connected is going to, in theory, raise that motivation, helping them feel confident, raise that. And then that empowering piece, giving them autonomy. And I always love that piece too, because I think a lot of that is taken away from teachers and it makes them feel like they're not professionals. And so anytime we can empower the people we're leading and give them some control and some autonomy, I believe that's going to help their motivation. There we go. Maybe click this and this should take to a link. There we go. And this is just optional, but it is in the navigation guide. And so I just kind of have that table. And if you scroll down, it shows that concept action. And then this is something, that second page, you could just fill out if you think this will help you to do some reflection as you're implementing your plan or going for your project goals. It's basically everything we talked about, but with a reflection. So we're identifying barriers. How does that relate to the skill, will, the theory of motivation, all of those things. And then kind of what are your actions going to be? So sort of what Nicole was saying, like have a plan before you go in, and maybe you don't even need any of that. Or at least knowing you've thought about it so that you're not blindsided and things like that. And so these are just some things to help hopefully make it smoother. It sounds like there aren't too many problems, but maybe you're not implementing it just yet, and some of these things may come up. And that is all that I wanted to share today. But are there any comments or questions or anything anyone wanted to add before we move on to the next section?
All right, so now I'm going to take some time and look at that leadership framework. And we've really been studying this framework for leadership because it helps name and also identify the roles and actions that we as bold math leaders can take to impact mathematics education. And so we have looked at leadership actions related to empowering and nurturing a culture of productive professionalism by looking at beliefs and mindsets, building those relationships, and then developing sustainable practices that support shifts in mathematics education. We've also looked at advocating for high quality math teaching and learning by looking specifically at curriculum and then the mathematical teaching practices. So today we're going to look at guiding principle 4, monitoring and acting on student evidence of learning. And I really like this quote and the connection that it makes between assessments and students. So before we get too far down into our work, we kind of need to build a base common understanding of what we're talking about with assessments and when to use them and how to use them and, you know, their purpose and all of that. So we're going to really quick in breakout rooms, just about 5 minutes. Give yourself some time to look over this document. And I will put, oh, wrong thing. I'm going to, sorry, I can't do 2 things at the same time. I'm going to put the link to our Google document that we can reference. Okay, so that should be in chat for you. And this is just going to be slide 1. So take a minute, kind of look over it, and then have some discussions on, there's some guiding questions there too. What data most directly impacts student reflection and goal setting? What's maybe a new idea from this? Something you're reminded of, something that puzzles you. So just about 5 minutes, have a quick little conversation, kind of get ourselves all speaking the same language, common understanding. Right, welcome back. So now that we've got kind of a general common language, common understanding of assessments, we're just going to dive right into this. So this guiding principle of leadership is really driven by and built on 3 big ideas: monitoring student learning at the classroom level, in teacher teams, and student learning at the district level. And within each of these big ideas, there's the 3 imperatives or the commitments to action that we've been talking about. And again, this year, we're just focusing on those first 2 imperatives, that commitment to self and commitment to colleagues, as it is relating to building that common understanding of high quality assessments, the types of assessments and the purposes, also that creation or design or identification of assessments, structures to collect, analyze, act on evidence of student learning, and then ways that we can provide feedback to students. So this first big idea of monitoring student learning in the classroom at the commitment to self level, our role as a leader really just focuses on formative assessments used in the classroom. And a definition of formative assessments from NCSM is that it's a process of gathering evidence within the stream of instruction in order to inform our teaching and learning. So for assessments to even be meaningful, we've got to have these 6 key components. First, we really have to be clear of what is our mathematical learning goal, not what are the performance goals or what are the tasks that the student's going to do or accomplish. What is the learning going to be? And then from there, we want to identify what is going to count as evidence of progress towards mastery of that learning goal. We also want to make sure that we're selecting tasks that will pull out where we can see what students are understanding and what they're not understanding. Think about how we're going to record and collect that evidence, analyzing it, and then of course, taking action on that. So this guiding principle, let's go here. So as leaders, we can facilitate discussions to identify what counts as evidence of student progress towards learning. So we can think about learning trajectories. First you need to know this, and then this, and then this, and this. And some resources we can use to help us with that is the Achieve the Coherence Map. We could also use those progression documents that the Common Core State Standards were built from. And another way we can look at identifying what counts as evidence would be taking the concept and what are some common misconceptions or patterns of thinking or difficulties or mistakes that are typically made with this concept. And then as the students are overcoming those, that can be our evidence. And so some great resources to help us identify that might be the Mathematics Companion Guide, even Vandewall's book, Teaching Student-Centered Mathematics, or any reference material like that that talks about the content and the concepts and how we learn it. Those are great resources. So the big idea of monitoring student learning in teacher teams is really about leadership actions that support teacher learning together through that use of common assessments. So we can improve our collective practices and understanding within the school. It also is a great way to help build those equitable student experiences because we're responding to students collectively. We're all on the same page. And it is an opportunity where we can create those resources to support students as they're taking ownership of their own learning. So for the next 10 minutes, we're going to head back out into our breakout rooms. And at this, commitment to self level, we can facilitate analysis and development of quality assessments that are aligned to the standards. So we're going to look at this tool in relation to a 3rd grade assessment dealing with using place value to add and subtract. We probably won't have enough time to go through all of the items on this tool. And some of our scoring on this tool will be based on the knowledge that we have of this concept. And so I don't think it'll be really critical I think we'll be able to get kind of a general sense and an overview of the aspects of this tool without that. Again, we'll go back to our shared Google Drive, and they're organized by your breakout room number. So find the slides that align with your breakout room number, there will be 3 slides. The first slide is this tool, and then the next 2 slides are the 3rd grade assessment. And on your last slide are some other guiding questions to continue the conversation once you finish this analysis. So we're just going to use this tool to help analyze the assessment and just kind of the quality of it. Any questions before we break out?
That was not enough time.
What?
Get through we didn't make it to number 3.
Okay.
Yeah, we were on number 1.
Okay. Well, maybe this will be, if you find it useful, a tool you can explore more on your own. Shoot. But just, I don't know, maybe we can't really get into these questions too much, but did you have kind of a general overview of, you know, how this might help identify strengths and weaknesses of an assessment?
All it did was confirm how awful the math tests are that we give. And nobody will listen to me. I'm going to take him this rubric.
I will say the one thing that we finally did at my brick and mortar school is I kind of insisted that we put the learning objective. So like we broke them into categories, but the learning objective was at the top. And then I said, hey, these kids are taking the ISATs. Like we need a score on a 1 to 4 scale because the kids are used to that 1 to 4 scale. And so then next to that topic, and we put it in student friendly language. So the kids, so it says like, I know how to solve a 2-step equation using the distributive property or whatever, you know, so we try to put it in student friendly language. And then there's a blank where we can put what the student score was out of 4. And I really liked them having that because I felt like then they knew exactly what I was looking for them to test on. And I think they felt a little more at ease on the test rather than just having something there. For some reason, I felt like it comforted them a little bit because they knew kind of the expectation. But
Any other connections you're making to your practice? What kind of ideas for modification is this giving you?
I'm talking too much, but everybody's so quiet. I think Charity made a really good point in that I think some of our test questions, they don't necessarily push kids to that higher order thinking. I think a lot of us could probably agree a lot of our test questions that teachers choose are very skills based. And so we're really not testing to see if the kids can actually apply what they're learning. It's more kind of, did they memorize the steps, basically?
Well, and one thing that I want you to notice is a lot of times your curriculum, the instructional chapters and modules are not aligned to how it assesses. So a lot of times I can come in to your buildings and I'll look at your curriculum and the tests are actually decent, maybe too big, maybe they need to be revised, but they're actually decent-ish. But then we go look at the lessons and the kids are being expected on the test to synthesize it all, to put it all together. And that's not happening in the chapters and in the instruction along the way. So that's something we have to be aware of. I just heard the best, and I'm going to mess it up, but this quote or idea that we've talked about the standards for mathematical practices and the, you know, those high quality practices that and behaviors that we want from our kids. And those are the things that we value, but you can't teach those. You have to develop them through experiences. You just can't teach it. And that's the hard part. So I think that's why we don't see them in a great way in curricula, because you can't teach them. You have to provide the experience and know how to facilitate that experience.
I also my experience last year, I was teaching algebra 2, which at our school is super, super traditional. And it's like by the time the kids get through 40 questions of skills-based problems, they don't want to do the story problems. So the kids will hardly ever do those. And then all of a sudden they're on the test and the kids never practiced them. So anyway, so I totally agree with what you're saying, Angie. And my other class,
So
my
the
algebra.
easiest,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry. I was going to say the easiest thing that you can do right now is flip flop them. Spend the time on the word problems and spend the little time on the scale problems.
Totally agree. I was going to say my algebra 1 class is totally discovery based. And so my kids are doing stuff like with application problems from the get-go. You know what I mean? So they're not scared of story problems. But anyways, so yeah, totally agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the fear of this kind of putting the control in the student and the thinking on the students is part of the problem? There is, like you said, we can't really teach it to them. We can only provide opportunities. And I wonder if that, it does for me as I do this more and more. I feel like I don't have control and I don't really know pinpoint exactly how a student's doing because they're not doing the exact algorithm or whatever. Does that make sense? Like, I wonder if that's part of the pushback is there's too much unknown and air.
I think you're hitting it on the head right there. Not only is there a lot of unknown, as a teacher, you've got to have a lot of tools in your toolbox to know how to do that well. And then you've got to have the tools for formative assessment. You've got to have the tools for collecting evidence and tracking in a way that helps you understand where they're at. And you have to have a deep sense and deep understanding of the content and that progression, like all of those things. This is a career endeavor. This is not a, let me get my feet wet for a couple of years and I'll have this. It's a lifetime of learning. So we've got to take realistic steps and have realistic goals because it's a big ask and it's worth it. I can remember walking out of my classroom, pulling my hair out, just like, I don't know where they're at. I don't know if they're getting this. I'm really trying to do this task-based instruction and are they even getting anything? And then I would do an assessment a couple weeks down the road, or we would get our ISAT scores and they'd be through the roof. And I hated having to wait for the ISAT scores because I feel like that wasn't soon enough information. And are my assessments gonna line up? The unknown is really, really hard, really hard. I'm more confident in it now that I have more experience. But when I was first starting, it just highlighted more of what I didn't know.
I agree. And I think like just like from teaching like a traditional and a discovery based class, like I was so much more active in my discovery based classroom. Like I was always questioning the kids and you know what I mean? Like running from group to group and like it was tiring, but it was so fun. Like the kids coming up with cool things and sharing and coming together as a class and sharing what groups were doing versus my algebra 2 classroom. Like I seriously was bored to tears because like it was just so traditional, but I hadn't taught that curriculum. So you know what I mean? I'm trying to give it a chance, but like after a month and a half in, I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like this is awful. So anyways, I think people are scared of discovery based because it is a little exhausting as a teacher because you have to have a ton of bag of tricks. Like you got to be ready for every question that a kid's going to ask and how they're going to try to solve it all sorts of different ways. But it's also so rewarding to see the kids like sharing ideas with each other. And I don't know, it's just so much more engaging.
I appreciate all these comments because I think it really speaks to kind of what we like as a leader, that shift of keep going the wrong way. Anyway, I don't know where I am, but it really by using the assessments, this just sparked a whole conversation. And it's not just about, what are our students learning, but it's really an opportunity to reflect on our practice, on our curriculum, on, our collective knowledge within a school, and just creates those organic opportunities, just like what we experienced. It was really cool. Thank you for all those thoughts and comments. All right, so we can think about assessments in a couple of different ways. We've got, our larger common summative assessments, and these are really good, for looking at, what can we address in our curriculum? What are our instructional strengths and weaknesses? Plus we get information about, what our students know. But then those small formative assessments really inform the decisions that we're making and help in that support of monitoring student progress. So look at this template for a second. And how could this tool be used in your leadership role?
We actually had some math PLCs. Well, I mean, they were grade level PLCs, but we mostly focused on math. That was before COVID for a couple years. And we did stuff like this. And at the time I was like, what are we doing? But now I look at this and I'm like, oh, I see what we're doing. So that's good.
Yeah, what did it bring out for you or your team? Yeah, what were the benefits of it?
I was so new. I have no idea. I don't remember. I just remember thinking at the time, like, I don't understand what we're doing and what is the point and why are we doing this? Partly
Okay.
because I think we didn't get to the last step where you talk about what changes, if any, to my teaching and the assessments and, the team. How can we change things so that we get more kids at the thorough understanding stage?
I wondered that too, going through the process, we do all this data analysis, we're talking, but then, yeah, how many times does that very last step get kind of lost? And I think it speaks a little bit to what Courtney was bringing up too, being aware of where we at in those quadrants and how that impacts what we do. So what understandings could be developed with this as we're collaborating together as teams and looking at assessments?
I mean, not just the obvious in the sense of like, as we agree together about which work shows minimal understanding, which work shows partial understanding and adequate and thorough, then we as teachers are more clear when we see student work where they're at just by looking at it without, having to have a meeting and go through it because we've discussed it and agreed theoretically.
Well, and I think it goes back to equity, like all kids are getting, it doesn't matter what class they're in the grade level, they're going to be getting the same assessment information back from teachers. Their stuff's going to be graded the same way, type of thing. They're going to be getting like a more equitable like math education throughout the grade level because all the teachers are on the same like mindset, same zone, same planning, if that makes sense. Sorry, I cannot verbalize anything at this hour correctly, but if that makes sense, I feel like it gives students throughout the grade level a better opportunity.
Yeah, that did make sense. And I think,
I'm sorry, April.
go ahead.
I've got a little delay here. So I actually got to sit in on a high school PLC at Hillcrest High School up in District 93. And their teachers were meeting. The one I watched was an algebra, no, it was higher level. I think it was algebra 2. And they were basically doing this as a PLC. They were going through and talking about the different standards for that class and what does it look like. And it was really powerful because they kept going back to the standards, not back to the book, but back to the standards. Well, the standard says this in this way. What would that look like? How would that look? And it was really amazing to hear them talk in this way.
I think that builds right off what Jennifer was saying, that you get that understanding of, okay, here's the standards, but this is what it looks like. These are all the components of it, and this is what mastery towards it is. Yeah. Thank you. All right. So the big idea of monitoring student learning at the district level is, it makes sense that it's more looking at the whole system and all the elements that are there and how they interact with each other and to give students the opportunities that we want. And so it's really more looking at those trends over time. And then at this level, this is, where a huge system plan is developed, but a key aspect of this that sometimes I wonder is always there or not. It's just really, how is this going to be monitored for effectiveness? This plan that we're implementing, how are we going to track this over time to see what's going on? So at this level, we're also shifting from thinking of assessments for learning. That's what we do that really drives our instructional decisions and where we're monitoring student progress, to now we're looking at assessments of learning. And we're evaluating, how are we doing on closing that achievement gap? Our system programs, the structures we have, the resources, tools available. What's our collective understanding of mathematics and best teaching practices and student engagement in those practice standards? And we'll also be looking at ways to kind of shift from those remediation efforts to intensification efforts and doing those things. So, thinking about your project, which one of these guiding principles of mathematics leadership does your project most align with? You may actually align with elements of all 4 of these, but which one, if you had to pick one, does your project most align with? And we haven't had a chance yet to get into designing and implementing structures. We're going to do that next month.
I mean, I would say mine, once it is actually created and on paper and happening, would most closely align to the second one. Empower and nurture a culture of productive professionalism. In regards to like how we teach. I'm not sure if that's what that means. I don't remember, but that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah. And yours does, that's just all about those beliefs and mindsets and those relationships and building those structures that support that change. Yeah, or absolutely.
I would say design for mine.
It was really fun to get to visit with so many of you and hear about what's going on. And I could see elements of a lot of these, more than just one in many of the projects. All right, so that's kind of our segue into our projects now.
All right, so we're going to take a hot second to play some math. We haven't done that, and we had so much fun last year, in my opinion. So here's what I want you to do. Let me share my screen just real quick so that it guides my thinking. But before we get into the math, April, if you don't mind, I'm going to tag along to something you shared real quickly. Have we shown you guys the tools for teachers? All right. So this is a resource. How I got here was through the ISAP portal. So if you have access to your ISAP portal, there's one specific thing that really goes well with what April was just sharing. And I really want you to just see it because you're going to love it just like I did. So tools for teachers is one of your options. You have to log in and you get here. And I think I've got a screenshot directions how to get here. But if you're taking notes, this is how you get here. In Tools for Teachers for Idaho, you want what's called the Connections playlists. You can find it right here, or you can use this little one over here. So either one will take you there. There's lots of other really great things. This is just my current favorite toy. Okay, so I'm in the correct Connections playlist. I'm going to go to math. I'm going to select 5th grade. Okay, so this website's a little deceiving because it looks like another filter. So you go, what's here? But if you scroll down, that's where the resources start. So down here, you'll see the different concepts that you can look into. So let's say I want fractions. Let's find the fractions unit right here, numbers and operations and fractions. Now, every page 3 through secondary looks like this. Now, check this out. Right here, it always starts with a beautiful rubric. And this rubric tells you what the below, the near, and the above should look like. And it describes it for each of these different content areas under fractions for 5th grade. So when you're having these conversations with your teams and you're pulling up that form that April showed you, you know, that when we're talking about who has thorough understanding, well, what does thorough understanding look like? What does adequate or partial understanding look like? Our assessment system gives us the tools to know what those actually look like. So for every area, you've got this rubric, and you can even click on tasks that are fully developed lesson with learning goals, success criteria, formative assessment, all built in, and all the materials, so that you can supplement your materials with these ISAT connected, standards connected activities. It gives you accessibility strategies, things to consider, some formative assessment. If I go back to the interim connection playlist, right here, they give you suggestions for interventions. So if you're pulling small groups back, or you have kiddos that are struggling, these might be, maybe I can do a quick verbal assessment on what do they know, what do they not know. If I need to dive deeper, it gives me some information. It gives me connections to which interim assessments. So if you're not familiar with the IABs, it's another tool within the assessment system that you can utilize throughout the year. I think if they close this next month, because
February 23rd.
Thank you. So they close soon, but what they are content versions. They're not the big comprehensive, but they're content versions. So smaller, more focused assessments. Hang on, my AirPods are about to die. Shoot, I got to think of a solution. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to switch audio real quick. Hang on.
And even though the interims are closed, you can still access all this stuff, and you can still use the questions in your classroom. They just can't take a scored interim test.
It gives me a rubric of what all of these look like. So as a leader, and we're having these conversations around our students and where their level of understanding is, it's not, I don't know if you've ever worked with teachers that have their own idea of what it looks like when a student gets it, and it doesn't match your idea of what it looks like. So this kind of helps us pull it away from ourselves. And it's not about me being right or you being right or wrong. It's about here's the tools that have been given to help us understand our standards and the assessment. So I just wanted to share that because it's my new favorite toy right now. Those of you below 3rd grade, I'm sorry. Sorry, Charity. I'm sure I have some resources though that would help you. Okay. All right. So thank you for letting me share that. I really wanted to just add that because it's such a cool resource. We're spending so much time creating what we need, and some of these things are now done for us and we just need to leverage them. So, all right. So on your navigation guide, you're going to see a link that says Desmos. We're going to just do a little activity. Don't click on it just yet, or don't start it just yet. We're going to do a little activity that just refreshes these best practices that we learned about in depth. My hope is that you're still trying to practice these things in your classroom every day, all year long. I would encourage you to be deliberate and really, oh, what am I working on? I know some of you really focused on your questioning last year. And are you still working that, or are you branching out into elicit and use evidence of student thinking, or any of the other categories? So today we're just going to play around with Desmos. So go ahead and click on that link right there on the Desmos navigation. You can choose to sign in. If you don't sign in, it's fine. It's just that your work won't get saved and you may not care. I certainly don't care. But I'm just letting you know, if you ever wanted to come back to it, it wouldn't be saved. So go ahead and log in and follow the directions, read the slides. You'll see that on the very first slide, that red dot, you can drag it like this. Okay, and then just follow the instructions for a few minutes. When I see that most people are getting through it, then we're going to have some conversation about some of the math that you're seeing. So I'm going to stop sharing and just let you play. All right, so I pulled some of your work to talk about it. And what I want you to do is take a look and think about how these are similar and how these are different. This was I think the second slide or the third slide you had to do, where you had to draw out the 27th step. So normally I'd throw you into groups, but for right now, can somebody explain this first one right here? We'll call this one number 1. Who can explain what they did to draw out the 27th step? Whose is this? I don't even remember.
I believe that one's mine.
All right, you can explain it, Danny. Thanks.
So I just copied the pattern, started with the orange dot, and then I just saw that it grew one blue one on the x-axis and then the y-axis, and then I just dotted 27 up and then 27 to the right.
And then did you go like this, like 1 and 1 and then 1 and 1, or did you do all 27 and then all 27?
I did all 27 on the x-axis and then up the 27.
All right. And then for number 2, whose was this?
That one's mine.
Who's that?
Nicole.
Nicole, tell me why you did it that way.
So I noticed, well, first of all, I'm drawing with my mouse and I knew I couldn't draw good circles. So, and then I just I saw the pattern, like in step 2, there were 2 blue dots on the right side of the orange dot and 2 blue dots above the dot. And then on step 3, I saw 3 and 3. So then I noticed it was matching that step number. So then I thought for 27, the orange always stayed. Like in my class, I always call that figure 0. And then I added 27 on the right and 27 on the top.
Hang on, I lost my pencil. Okay, so the orange always stayed. So does the 27th is the 27th step. So does the 27 include the orange? Or does it not include the orange? So the 27 is the number of blue dots?
Yes.
Okay. So now I want to go to the next idea. Oops, let me clear this. All right. So here, we're going to look at this first one. I'm going to number them real quick. And I want you to just compare these 3. Look at the 27th and then look at the nth. And see if you can figure out what the N is. What is the N? Is it the orange? Is it the blue? Is it the step? What is the N value?
It said it was the step at the top of that page.
At the top of the slide on the other one?
Yeah, on this slide, it said N represents the steps or something like that.
Okay. So whose was this one right here?
That was mine.
So tell me N plus 1. Explain that to me.
I just noticed that whatever it was in the left, you added that to it, but then one more. So the N was the same, but then one more.
All right, so I'm going to do something real quick here. I'm going to make what's called a new album. I'm going to do a little bit different here. I'm going to go here. If you haven't used Desmos, it's pretty awesome. Okay. So now, all right, so Courtney said this N represents what?
It could be the length or the x-axis or whatever you want to call it.
Okay. So then this N would be the other one, right? All right, now what's the 1?
The orange dot.
So now let's look at, you did all addition for yours, right? So now I want to look at, and we're not going to spend a ton of time on these, just because it's really hard to facilitate tasks with a mouse. I'm really stretching my skills here. All right, so let's look at the 2N plus the 1. I'm pausing to think of what I want my question to be. Okay, I know what I want my question to be. Hang on. I'm formulating it. All right, so here's my question. In Courtney's, she's saying the length of one side, which is the same as the step, the blue dots, plus the length of the other side, plus the one orange one, will give me any step that I want to get. So here, this person is saying 2 times the step plus 1 will also give me any step that I want. I'm gonna just have, rather than throw you into groups, I want somebody that has struggled with this, that is having an aha moment, explain how that connects to the model. So I'm asking you to be vulnerable. So somebody that maybe didn't see it right away.
Well, I didn't get to fill out the graph part. Like I was still going through because it took me forever to figure out how to use the drawing tool since I'd never used the program before.
Sorry.
But now as I'm looking at this, I can see like, okay, 2 groups of N plus my orange dot there. And so I've got group, each axis is a group, and I've got 2 axes it's going down.
So 2 groups of my steps. And then the 1 is it always that orange dot, or could it be something else?
In this picture or in
Yep, in this
life?
picture. Good question. No, in this picture, because sometimes when we have growing patterns, that +1 could actually be something else. So in this model, is it always that orange, or did anybody see that it could have been something else represented? It's not a trick question.
I think it's always the orange.
What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree?
I mean, if you're thinking about it like on a graph, like if you had like your X and Y and then you started numbering, like that could be your 0, like where the axes meet.
So since you brought up the graph, let's go look at it. I gotta clear my mess here. Let's just go here. All right, so I'm just gonna pick one. All right. So here, if you didn't play with it, so you're saying if you just, what were you saying, Justine?
Well, like if it's going right on the axis, is that orange dot would be your 0, your starting point.
And is it the 0 or is it a 1?
Well, now that I'm looking and see this, because I didn't get to this step.
Mhm.
So now that I'm looking at with the graph, I would almost say 1 to like
What do you guys?
It looks like half to me because there's 2 dots in each. Oh wait, it's counting by 2s, isn't it? Never mind.
That's I'm like, I can't see, I'm blind.
There you go. So I made it really big. So that's how it's increasing.
It looks like 1. I don't know.
So it's always that one, like Jennifer was saying, it's always that one that's always going to be the same. All right. So we'll just leave this at this. I want to come back to here. And let's talk about these things that you just saw. Now, if we were in person in a classroom, I would be facilitating it much more rigorously with turn and talks and partners. And I actually have, I'll take off that pacing so that you can actually see you could actually get in there since I'm doing this. I will take off the pacing and then you can go in. There's like several other growing patterns that you can play with. Oops. Okay, there's a snake and there's a whole bunch, but don't do it right now. You can play with it later. So what I want you to do is share with me some ideas that you have. What time are we at? About where do you see these things being experienced or the potential for them to be experienced?
Well, I look at the elicit and use evidence of student thinking. So I think that goes back to our table where you had like N plus N plus 1, like that would be their evidence of, okay, they're adding them. And then the other was what, 2N times 1. So they're seeing it as like groups of N plus the 1 orange dot. So like you can see where the concept development is for each student in the table after they've been able to draw it and like see and think about it.
Other thoughts?
I mean, there's definitely an element of use and connect mathematical representations. Like you're seeing it, you're drawing it, you're connecting it to the numbers in the equation.
And I picked a fairly simple visual to be able to see the 2N and the 2N on the visual. A lot of times, if we were to get into some harder ones, it's really fun to, as we start seeing them differently and then break it down into the nth term or the nth. All right, so just showing the quality of task, like if I picked this one specifically because I knew we had a lot of elementary teachers, and going straight into some of that just basic linear graphing and just that initial of determining what the equation would be from a table. Some of us haven't done that in quite a while. So starting with a visual that we can all build the pattern, and then we can start having that conversation. So going back to selecting the right task is really important. So I started one with, it was much more low level, and then we could build into some high levels. So we'll probably play around with some Desmos if you haven't used that before. I know secondary tends to use it a lot. So in your projects, hopefully you've got some plans. In your facilitator guide, you have a link to your folder. And in your folder, I have updated all of your starts of your logic models. So sometime in this next week, we're going to send a follow-up email. Sometime in this next week, I want you to take a look at the inputs, the activities, the outputs, the outcomes, and update your logic model so you have a completed document. And we'll check in with you. We'll take a look at this. We might add some feedback or some questions. So you can, Lori, I'm just going to pick yours. You can go into your logic model, see your description of your situation, your goals, and then we want you to finalize these other sections. Not all of these outputs need to be filled in. They're just spaces for you to fill in. Questions on that? But by the end of next week, we'd like to see, it really should take you less than 10 minutes. We'd like to see a completed logic model. This is basically outlining your whole project. Simply, in a graphic organizer. Any questions on that?
I actually had one. Wasn't there a, so I have the logic model in my folder, but wasn't there like a shared one and we had to pick a slide? Do I just copy and paste? So
I already,
or-
I thought I did, does yours not have the new one? Let me check. Because I went through the shared one and I moved everybody's over. Yep. So Charity, there's yours. Right
so
in your
the other
folder.
one, the other one doesn't exist then is what you're saying?
It still exists. I just took everybody's slides and made sure you had access to it in your own personal folder.
Okay. It'll just update on the other one. Okay. I'm following
It
you.
won't update on the other one, but you can just update it in your folder.
Okay.
Sound good? All right. So on your next steps, please update your logic model. Here's the definitions. If you have a project partner, you can work with them on it. I do want to emphasize, if you found value in that one-on-one interview or that one-on-one check-in, you are welcome to reach out to any one of us and say, hey, can we schedule another one-on-one? Like, it does not have to be a formal thing. I've got time after school. Just reach out. I need somebody to talk through this with. You are welcome to take advantage of that as much as you'd like. All right, so please click on the exit tickets and do a quick, fill that out. Let us know anything that we need to know. And we'll stay on for a few minutes to answer any questions. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.